For 2,000 years, one quiet force has destroyed more empires than all the armies in history, and most people never even notice it until it is too late. Climate change has triggered more collapses than warfare, politics, or corruption, and the Roman Empire shows exactly how. People think Rome lost Britain to waves of barbarians, but the truth is far stranger. Britain did not fall because invaders got stronger. It fell because it suddenly cost Rome 5 times more to defend than the province was worth. And the collapse happened so slowly that nobody realized it was already underway. A tiny shift in the weather triggered a chain reaction that ripped through farms, taxation, military pay, and frontier security. When the rain stopped falling across Britain, an entire military economy that depended on stable harvests began to fall apart. Rome's own records show grain accounted for nearly 70% of all military logistics in the western provinces. The system only worked because food was predictable. Tree ring research shows that southern Britain normally received about 51 millimeters of rain each month during the April to July growing season. That small amount was enough to sustain spelt wheat and barley across thousands of farms. Then the sky simply shut down. In 364, rainfall collapsed to 29 millimeters. In 365, it dropped again to 28. In 366, it reached only 37. 3 drought summers in a row. Modern climate scientists describe this pattern as a one-in-a-century event, repeated 3 times back to back. As the skies dried, Britain's grain output fell sharply. Archaeobotanical studies suggest production declined by roughly 40% compared to its earlier peak. This collapse hit the empire's logistics instantly because food was the backbone of military budgets. Each Roman legion required around 2,000 tons of grain per year. Britain had supported 4 legions in earlier centuries, roughly 20,000 heavy infantry plus support staff. Even after troop numbers were reduced, the burden remained enormous. And by the 4th century, soldiers relied more on rations than cash because inflation had destroyed the real value of the denarius. When rations shrank, loyalty shrank with them. The historian Ammianus wrote that civilians were living in the utmost conditions of famine, and archaeological digs at Vindolanda, Housesteads, and Birdoswald show signs of sudden abandonment. Meals were left unfinished, workshops were deserted, fort gates stood open. With local food supplies failing, Rome was forced to import grain from Africa, Egypt, and Gaul. North Africa alone supplied up to 400,000 tons of grain annually to the empire. But now Britain needed part of that supply at the worst possible moment. And the climate had made shipping significantly harder. The late antique Little Ice Age reduced European temperatures by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, shortening sailing seasons and increasing storm frequency. Wind patterns shifted, ships took longer routes, losses rose. The cost of supplying a single British legion tripled. Rome's frontier system depended on cheap, reliable logistics. Once those logistics broke, every distant outpost turned into a financial wound the empire could not close. And in 367, that wound opened fully. The Picts, Scotti, Saxons, and Atticotti launched the Great Conspiracy against a frontier already weakened by famine. Contemporary Roman sources describe coordinated attacks on forts, towns, and coastal stations. The Count of the Saxon Shore was reportedly killed. Entire units disappeared. Many gates were unguarded because troops had deserted. The intelligence agents who monitored northern tribes simply stopped reporting. Raiders walked into positions that once required elite legions to defend. Rome responded by sending General Flavius Theodosius with several elite units, including Batavians and Herulians. He retook towns, restored order, and rebuilt forts. But the price was staggering. Suppressing the Great Conspiracy required major troop movements, emergency grain imports, and a full military reorganization across the island. Even after victory, the fields did not recover. Europe continued cooling. Modern climate reconstructions show that from AD 536 onward, temperatures fell further following volcanic eruptions, marking the coldest decade in 2,000 years. Britain had already been suffering from regional instability long before that deeper freeze. With food shortages at home and new threats across the empire, Britain slipped down the priority list. Tax revenues from British farms had collapsed. Some estimates suggest that by the early 400s, British tax collection had fallen to a fraction of its former value. Officials realised that the cost of defending the island was now up to 5 times greater than the economic benefits it produced. And this came at a time when the Roman military budget was already consuming nearly half of the empire's entire revenue. The late Roman army numbered around 600,000 soldiers across all fronts. Every frontier was screaming for more men, more food, more coin. Goths pushed across the Danube. The Persians pressured the east. The Huns destabilized Central Europe. Multiple provinces were hit by plague and famine. Resources had to be redirected to regions where loss would be lethal. Whenever empires face impossible choices, the outer regions are the first to be sacrificed. History repeats this pattern endlessly. In 410, Emperor Honorius sent the now famous message advising British cities to look to their own defence. It was not a panicked order, it was the final confirmation of a long economic calculation. Rome did not abandon Britain because it was defeated. It abandoned Britain because defending the island no longer made financial sense. The barbarians simply moved into the vacuum the empire left behind. And this is where the story stops being ancient history, because the same pattern is unfolding again today on a global scale. The United States currently operates around 750 overseas bases across more than 80 countries. It spends over $850 billion a year on defense. This global network is larger, more complex, and more expensive than anything Rome ever attempted. In 2021, the Pentagon released a major climate risk assessment. Nearly 1,400 installations were flagged as facing direct threats from rising seas, extreme heat, drought, storms, or wildfire. That is almost the entire military footprint. Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida suffered more than $4 billion in hurricane damage in 2018. Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, a key bomber and submarine hub, faces accelerating sea level rise that threatens both its runway and freshwater supply. Meanwhile, America's own agricultural backbone is straining. The western United States is in the worst mega-drought in at least 1,200 years. The Colorado River, which supports 40 million people, no longer delivers its promised flows. These are not isolated warnings. They form the same pattern that once destroyed Rome's ability to project power. Climate stresses infrastructure. Stressed infrastructure strains logistics. Logistical strain inflates cost. Rising costs force strategic withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal reshapes global power. Modern military planners already use phrases such as right-sizing, strategic realignment, and posture optimization. These are today's equivalent of Rome quietly moving troops away from Britain decades before the final abandonment. Empires rarely announce their retreats. They disguise them as strategy. But behind every official statement is the same fundamental truth. Climate is changing the price of power. Rome did not leave Britain because it was weak. It left because climate made the province poor. And poverty, not invasion, is what destroys empires. When the cost of defense outweighs the value of holding the frontier, collapse becomes a financial equation. When the climate shifts the numbers, even the strongest superpowers eventually face the same choice Rome did. Hold the edges at any cost, or walk away before the cost destroys the core. Rome walked away. Someone else filled the empty space. And today, the world is watching the same conditions form again. The only question left is who fills the space modern empires leave behind.